Welcome to Nazarene Israel. My name is Norman Willis, and I'll be your host for this week's Parasha, Hukat, for 2022. And in this Parasha, we're going to see Elohim's great love and continuing steadfast commitment to us. We're going to see that Elohim made this steadfast commitment with our ancestors some 3,500 years ago at the first Pesach, and he's remained committed to us ever since. After some 3,500 years of special treatment, are we perhaps finally ready to commit back to him? The Hebrew term Hukat is Strong's Hebrew 2708 and refers to ordinances or statutes. These are laws that basically don't go away. And in the Torah portion of Parasha Chukat, we begin with the ordinances or the statutes, or we could say the Torah of the red heifer. We covered the instructions and the statutes regarding the red heifer in our study on how Yeshua cleanses an unclean world in Nazarene Scripture Studies, Volume 4. And in that study, we show two special rituals that pertain to what might be called ritual cleansing in a cleansed altar environment. And the red heifer is the second of those two special rituals. And we hope you'll enjoy that study. Perhaps we'll give you some insight regarding what is the meaning of the various offerings and rituals that we go through in the temple. But then after the statutes of the red heifer, we come to chapter 20 and we come to the waters of Meribah. And we could hope for some improvement, but it's the same thing all over again. Every week it's the same thing. And brothers, sisters, if everything is all right, why is it this way with us? You know, Yahweh committed to our ancestors way, way back at the original marriage deal, some 3,500 years ago. And he's still waiting for his war bride to make good on her pledge, to make good on her vow and her commitment, to purify herself and to become his helper bride, to listen to his voice, to do everything that he says, including all of his written commandments, because those are just things the Spirit said in the past. But as we show in our study on the ancient Hebrew wedding, and we also talked about earlier in this Parashah series, so just to recap briefly, the Pesach or Passover was an agreement to marry, and this agreement was between Elohim and us, our forefathers. And in Hebraic culture, an agreement to get married is first celebrated by a private shared meal, and that's basically what the Pesach is. The public announcement and the betrothal then comes at Shavuot, or Pentecost, and in Hebraic culture, once a wedding is announced, it's official. You're married, even though the consummation and the wedding week normally may not come for another several months. Now, we can't really do much, and this is sad. We can't do much for Brother Judah because even though we know he's listening to our broadcasts, he's just not getting it. He's not listening for understanding. He's listening to dispute and for argumentation and to undermine. So we're not going to get very far with him. So just talking between us Ephraimites, brothers and sisters, what's our problem? What's wrong with us? How can it be that Elohim gives us everything we have? He gives us our breath, our heartbeats, everything we have. And how can it be that he made a marriage commitment to us some 3,500 years ago, and he's been steadfast ever since, but we're not yet ready to make a commitment back to him? How can that be? We also saw earlier in this Parashah series that Yeshua was the Malach, or the angel that Yahweh sent with us, that Elohim told us we needed to be careful and diligent to obey him and to do the things that he said. We needed to hear his voice and do everything that he instructs us, including the statutes and ordinances of the red heifer and all the rest of the Torah. So how can it be that Yeshua first gave us the Torah some 3,500 years ago, and then he died for our Torah breaking some 2,000 years ago? And we're supposed to have his Spirit now for some 2 millennia. And yet, don't we know brothers and sisters in Ephraim who aren't yet ready to make a commitment back to their Elohim? brothers, sisters, how can this be? Why is this? How can Elohim give everything to us and be full of steadfast, loyal love toward us? Kindness, mercy, forgiving. We need to talk about some very real things here, because what we keep seeing is that our ancestors are basically related to us, because we see that our ancestors had the exact same problems in the past as the majority of us in Ephraim are suffering from today. And that's that they're not looking to do Elohim's will. They're not looking to go out to war for Elohim. Them, like us, are most of us looking for a broad, easy, kind of a lazy boy way straight to the wedding feast? Yeah, sure, we want to be married to the son of the king of the universe. I mean, who wouldn't? But not if there's any work required. Not if there's any steadfast commitment required. To make a marriage work, don't both parties have to be committed? Don't both parties have to give 100%, even if the other party's not doing their part? So why is it that Elohim is the only one who has to be committed? Why is it that we're not required to be committed back? Is it because he has such steadfast, loyal love, and he's an Elohim patient and merciful and kind and forgiving? We know we can abuse his faith. We know we can abuse his trust. Is that why we do it? Because with most of us, aren't we still sitting on our throne and letting Yeshua wash our feet? Aren't we still calling the shots and expecting Elohim to run our errands for us, instead of showing up for duty and becoming his errand boys? Well, we're told to love Yahweh our Elohim with all of our heart, with all of our soul, and with all of our strength. Are we doing that? If we're going to do that, aren't we supposed to be most committed of all to our Elohim? Isn't that where our loyalty and our allegiance should truly lie? But how many of us are truly loyal to Elohim like that? Let me ask you a personal question. Are we more committed to Elohim than we are to our spouse? Or for how many of us is pleasing our spouse more important than pleasing Elohim? Let's be honest about these things. Just looking from the way things went, doesn't it kind of seem like most of our forefathers, they thought they were just going to leave Egypt and just stroll to the promised land, kind of like a waltzing or a walk through the park? And everything was going to be the red carpet treatment, little rose petals sprinkled out for us. Or better yet, maybe we'd be carried aloft and whisked to our new house as a bride is traditionally carried aloft during the day of the consummation, start of the wedding feast. She's carried aloft from her biological father's house to her new husband's father's house. Wouldn't that be so nice to be carried aloft, just like people dream of flying back to the land in the rapture? Okay, the only problem with that is that's not Elohim's plan. Elohim tells us he's a man of war. He's a war Elohim. And back in ancient times, when a commanding general went out on an extended war campaign, quite oftentimes they would bring their wives and their families with them. Just to mention it, we saw the same kind of thing in the Crusades. The poor couldn't usually afford to bring their wives and families with them, but the kings and nobles often did. And they especially did if it was going to be an extended war campaign, kind of like the conquest of the land of Canaan. That took a long time. But here's the thing. Maybe our forefathers, maybe they didn't know at the time of the first Pesach. Maybe they didn't even know when they said their I do's at Mount Sinai either. Maybe all they knew, they didn't know they're getting married. All they knew, they were cutting a covenant with their Elohim. So he would pass over them with the death angel. Maybe that's all they knew. Maybe they didn't know what they were getting into. Perhaps. Maybe they didn't know what the relationship would entail. And isn't that sometimes the same way with us, brothers and sisters? Maybe we don't know everything we're getting into at the time we first accept Yeshua. Like, did anyone know they were signing up for marriage when they first got struck in the heart and said the John 3:16 sinner's prayer? Did you? I didn't. But the question is, brothers, sisters, now that we know these things, what do we do now? How many of us truly want to be pleasing to him? How many of us truly want to help him get the kingdom he so richly deserves? How many of us appreciate his steadfast, loyal love and commitment to us? And if we truly do appreciate these things, then are we behaving as if we are already committed? How many of us commit to Elohim at least as much as we commit to our spouse? How many of us commit to Elohim more than we commit to our spouse, like we're supposed to? Because let's be frank, Elohim commits to us long before we ever even think to commit to him. And that fact seems to be what trips a lot of people up, because people tend to abuse his kindness. They take his kindness for blindness. So maybe our forefathers thought they were ready for the honeymoon. Maybe they thought they were ready for the wedding feast. Oh, and what Elohim had in mind first was a war campaign. Maybe the bride was going to come along with him on the war campaign, and together they were going to conquer the promised land. Maybe our forefathers weren't thinking about a long war campaign. But it doesn't matter. We signed up as slaves. We don't make the decisions here. So can we imagine our ancestors' surprise when our forefathers came to the wilderness of Zin and there wasn't even any water for the congregation? Forget turning the water into wine. There just plain wasn't any water to begin with. So then our ancestors in Ephraim prayed to Yahweh and trusted that he would provide for them. And they never complained about anything. That's just how much trust they had in him. Oh, wait, sorry. Oh, it says our forefathers quarreled with Moshe and said, "Oh, would that we had perished. Oh, when our brothers perished before Yahweh." Really? Really? Why have you brought the assembly of Yahweh out into this horrible wilderness place, that we should die of thirst here, both we and our cattle? Oh! And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil, awful, horrible place? This is no place for a bride. It's no place for grapes or figs or vines or pomegranates. There's no fruit punch fountain. There's just no way we could just pray and then trust our all-powerful Father to provide for our needs, even though we've seen miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle, because there's no water to drink here at this exact moment. We were looking forward to the honeymoon. We were looking forward to the wedding feast. We were looking forward to being taken to the bridal suite. We didn't think that our war Elohim husband was going to take us out to take the land of milk and honey as part of his war campaign. No, we thought you were taking us straight to a land filled with tables full of milk and honey. We didn't think we had to do any work. We just thought that being the bride of the son of the king of the universe, we were just going to sit around doing our hair and nails and having a good old time, la-di-da, watching TV shows. Oh, we had no idea you were calling us to a narrow and afflicted pathway. We had no idea we'd have to do anything for you. Isn't this our forefathers? And if we think about it, isn't this us? We also think we're getting everything correct. Well, as they say in the land of Israel, malasot, what to do. Knowing these things now, how shall we live? So we found ourselves in a situation. We didn't know what to do with it. We weren't expecting it. But were we good sports about it? Because, to be good sports about it and to be good slaves for our husband and king, does it really matter what we want? Does it really matter that we don't like the trial that's set before us? And maybe, just maybe, is this perhaps like it is with some of us in Ephraim today? Maybe we just thought we were going to say the John 3:16 prayer and have lunch at our friends' houses on Shabbat, watch Saturday Night Live together. Oh, And now we're all disciples on our way to being the bride, right? We're going to get whisked back to the land of Israel in a cloud, right? Oh, we think we already qualify as his bride before we've even lifted a finger to help him. We think we're qualified to be his perfect, set apart helpmeet, even though we're not helping him actively. Yeah, I mean, maybe we didn't know when we said the John 3:16 prayer, or we repented. Maybe we didn't know that Scripture calls for tithing and organization, congregational discipline. Oh, surprise! But the question is, now that we know, now what do we do with what we know? So now we can ask this question, malasot. Now what do we do if we truly want to be faithful and keep our commitment to our love? He's committed to us. He's steadfast to us. Are we committed to him? Are we steadfast toward him? Perhaps an analogy might help. Well, the Father has plans to make us into set-apart wine, and sometimes we end up getting poured out as a drink offering, just as Shaleach Shaul was also poured out. And the drink offering represents sacrifice, and that's a good thing. We want that level of sacrifice because Elohim loves it. That's what he's looking for, is the kind of commitment, the kind of dedication that wants to make a sacrifice to him, to become his set-apart helper bride. He's looking for us to pour ourselves out as a drink offering of wine, rather than whining about every little thing as we go through the wilderness. But if you think about it, how do you get wine? Well, first we have to crush the grapes, and we are the grapes. It doesn't feel good any more probably than it feels good to wander through the Midian the rest of our lives. No one likes to be crushed, but grapes have to be crushed if they are to give their blood that then gets turned into wine. So brothers, sisters, when we are crushed, what comes out? Is it blood of grapes making wine fit for a king? Or is it whining that we have to obey his Torah and put his will and his desires over our own? Where you can almost hear the crying. It's like, oh, we have to decrease so that he might increase. No kidding. Brothers, why were our ancestors whining when Yahweh crushed their hopes of a broad, easy road going straight to the wedding feast? And he decided to make them into new crushed wine instead. Maybe they were whining because they had a little false hopes, a little false expectations, maybe believing some of the devil's lies. Or did they perhaps think it was going to be much easier than it was, just like many of us think that the narrow and afflicted path ought to be much broader and easier than it really is? Well, let's remember that these are our ancestors, and Genesis 1 tells us that living beings reproduce after their own kinds, meaning sometimes the apple doesn't fall very far from the tree, if you know what I'm saying. So, but if our forefathers represented the unwillingness to live up to the wedding vows without whining, then what about us? Are we willing to do everything in the Torah without whining? Making a commitment. Chapter 20 and verse 7. Then Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, take the rod, you and your brother Aharon, and gather the congregation together. And then I want you to speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will yield its water. Thus you shall bring the waters of the Spirit for the children of Israel out of the rock, symbolic of Yeshua, and give drink to all the congregation and their animals. So then Moshe took the rod from before Yahweh as he had commanded him, but then Moshe and Aharon gathered the assembly together before the rock, and Moshe said to them, hear now, you rebels, must we bring water for you out of this rock? Then Moshe lifted his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation and their animals all drank. But then Yahweh spoke to Moshe and Aharon, saying, because you did not believe me to obey me, this did not set me apart in the eyes of the children of Israel. Therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given to them. We could talk all day on this point, but the big problem here is that Yahweh told Moshe to speak to the rock so that it might bring forth its waters. That way Yahweh would be set apart for performing his miracle before the people. Only Moshe and Aharon took credit for bringing water out of the rock for themselves. Well, also to use an analogy, if we can think of Moshe as being symbolic of the Torah at some point, then the point is that we can use the rod of Torah to strike the rock, meaning Yeshua. We should be speaking to the rock. We could also comment that Brother Judah struck the rock once already in the 1st century, and according to both pattern and prophecy, he's getting ready to strike the rock's body a second time in these end times. That's another reason to form set-apart communities, is that this kind of persecution is prophesied and therefore it is coming. And you can read all about that in our study on Revelation in the End Times or Revelation Simplified on YouTube. But then after that, Edom or Esau refused to let our forefathers pass through their borders. And we'll see this again in our Haftarah prophetic portion. But then the king of Arad, who lived in the Negev or the south, heard that Israel was coming. So the king of Arad fought against our forefathers and took some of them captive. And, drum roll please, our forefathers actually asked Yahweh first. And then our forefathers vowed a vow that if Yahweh would deliver Arad into their hand, they would devote all of Arad's cities to destruction, probably including all of the goods. Now, earlier in this series, in Parasha Chukat, we saw how Yahweh told our forefathers to wipe out the children of Amalek because they had ambushed Israel on the way. Only our forefathers saw the good livestock. And it seemed good in their eyes to ask King Shaul if they could please keep all the livestock alive so they could use them to make free sacrifices for Yahweh. And Shaul said yes in order to please the people, even though it was the opposite of what Yahweh said to do. So Shaul was pleasing the people, but he was not pleasing to Yahweh. How many of us in congregation leadership positions are doing things that are pleasing the people, but we're not pleasing Yahweh or Elohim? How many husbands are pleasing their wives and they're not pleasing Yahweh Elohim? Well, here our forefathers actually did good. They vowed to devote to destruction all of Arad's cities and probably all of the goods. What that means is there wasn't any profit motive. There wasn't any incentive based on mammon. So, because they asked first and because their motivation was clean, Elohim blessed their request. And next week, we'll see what happens when we do the opposite, when we do have a profit motive, and we'll see it's not good. Okay, so returning to the history, now great-great-grandpa and grandma have to backtrack. Chapter 21 and verse 4 tells us that our ancestors had to journey from Mount Hor by way of the Yam Suf, or the Sea of Reeds, and they go all the way around the land of Eden. And the soul of our forefathers became very discouraged on the way. Has anybody ever had a family outing or a camping trip like this? You thought you had a plan to get to your destination, but the bridge is out or the road is closed, or you can't go through that border. So now you end up backtracking. And so what do the children say? I'm tired. Are we there yet? Are you lost? Ugh, who put you in charge of this outing anyway? Verse 5, the people spoke against Elohim and against Moshe, saying, why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? There's no food and there's no water. Nothing is fit for a queen. And our soul loathes this worthless miracle bread that Yahweh rains for us out of the heavens every single day. We're tired of seeing miracles daily. We're tired of seeing the column of fire and cloud. Where's the wedding buffet already? Is it going to be catered? Verse 6, can we imagine how much Elohim likes this? His war bride won't commit, and she won't stop complaining. He's committed to us. Have we committed to him? So Elohim sent fiery serpents among our people, and they bit our forefathers. and many of our ancestors died. So, one more for the history books. Our forefathers got rebuked, and our forefathers repented. And repentance is good. But where is our constancy? Where is our steadfastness? Brothers and sisters, where is our commitment? And perhaps for some, this might be how we treat our earthly leaders, or perhaps our earthly husbands, or our congregation leaders. If things don't go perfectly smoothly, don't the criticisms start to come out? Well, we don't like how the creator's running the show, so we become contentious, maybe a little contentious. Brothers, sisters, how would we like to be married to us? I mean, how do Yahweh's ears ever heal? And why do we always seem to forget all the good stuff that Yahweh's done for us all along? Why do we forget his character? Why do we always seem to forget all of his benefits, even though we're told to remember all of his benefits? We're talking about how Yahweh keeps his commitments to us. His faithfulness is great. No matter what we do, he's going to do the right thing. In fact, after all of our complaining and our whining and our rebellions, Yahweh still helped us defeat King Sihon of the Amorites. And after that, he also helped us to defeat King Og of the Amorites. And then our forefathers set out and camped in the plains of Moab beyond the Jordan at Jericho. And next week, we're going to see that Moab was in great dread of our forefathers because we were many because of Yahweh's great favor. And Moab was overcome with fear of our fathers. We're going to talk about what happens next week in Parasha Balak, where we see what happens when people mix business and ministry together. It's not good. Now let's come to our Haftarah prophetic portion. So we come to Shoftim, or Judges chapter 11, and here we read about Jephthah, or Jephthah the Gileadite. He's east of the Jordan. He was a mighty man of valor. The only problem is he was the son of a whore. So when Gilead's wife bore sons, the legitimate sons drove the mamzer Jephthah out. Well, reversals don't always take so long in Scripture. By the time we hit verse 4, the people of Ammon were turning the world upside down. The people of Ammon made war against our forefathers in Israel, just like we read about with kings Sihon and Og. But this time, the Ammonites falsely claimed that Israel had stolen their land. Well, Jephthah's answer is epic because he gets it. So basically, he says to them, you know what? You keep what your God Chemosh gave you. We're going to keep what Yahweh Elohim gave us. What a great answer, because Jephthah gets it. He understands that it's our job to build Elohim's kingdom. That's what he wants. He wants us to build a kingdom for him. But how many of us know that, and yet still we shy away from the work? Still we withhold our sword from the battle. What are we going to do in the future? Not only when we stand before the great white throne in the judgment, but let's just take a closer example. What are we going to do when we get all back safely home in the land of Israel, after Armageddon, after the ingathering? And our children ask us, what'd you do in the spiritual war, Daddy? What are we going to say? How many of us are going to have to say, I didn't do anything. I was a spiritual draft dodger. I withheld my sword from blood. How's that going to feel knowing we ignored our commitment to our Elohim? If we even make it back to the land like that at all. Let's close by seeing what the renewed covenant has to say about these things. So let's go first to Kepha Aleph, or 1 Peter, and let's stop briefly in chapter 1 and verse 1. And here Kepha tells us he's writing his epistle to the pilgrims of the Assyrian dispersion. Okay, as we explained in the Nazarene Israel study, that's us. That's the northern house of Ephraim, or the northern house of Israel. So what does Kepha say to us? Well, sometimes I kind of halfway wonder if Kepha maybe was reading this parasha when he wrote this epistle, because everything in there lines up. But verse 13, he says, therefore gird up the loins of your mind and be sober, meaning be ready for battle. Because we're in a battle. We're trying to build our Elohim a kingdom. He says, and rest your hope fully upon the favor that is to be brought to you at the revelation of Yeshua Messiah, if we are obedient children, keeping our commitments, doing everything the Torah says to do, hearing his voice and obeying it, not conforming ourselves to our former lusts and the desires of our heart, as in our former days of ignorance, but as he who called us is set apart, we also should be set apart in all our conduct, because it is written, be set apart, for I am set apart. And isn't that what our ancestors should have been doing in the wilderness? And isn't that what we also should be doing right now, is to making sure that we are set apart as he is set apart by hearing his voice and obeying it? Well, the whole book is fabulous. There's wonderful material in there. But right now, let's jump to chapter 4 and verse 12, where Kisa could also be talking about what happened with our forefathers in the wilderness. He says, Beloved, don't think it's strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing is happening to you. It's not. It's normal. And the reason these things are happening is because Elohim needs to test us. He needs to know if we're going to quit on him, or we're going to keep our marriage vows, or we're going to be faithful and keep our commitments with him. He says, and rejoice to the extent that we partake of Messiah's sufferings, that when his glory is revealed, we also may be glad with exceedingly great joy, because to partake of Messiah's sufferings is to be good soldiers of Yeshua Messiah and to fight his battles for him. We're no longer sitting on the throne. He's the one sitting on the throne, and we're the armies out in the field. Isn't that basically what our forefathers didn't understand? Perhaps they were in such a hurry to get to the bridal buffet that they forgot all about serving their husband, about taking care of the needs of their war Elohim husband. So the helpmeet didn't help the husband, didn't help him build his kingdom. It's kind of a little red hen scenario. However much we help Yeshua build his unified global kingdom for his Father, that's how much we're going to benefit when we go stand before the great white throne judgment. Because Yeshua promises plainly to reward all those who have served him both in spirit and in truth, meaning keeping all the commandments we're told to keep. And he promises to punish those who won't keep their commitments to him. So which choice will we make? Shabbat Shalom.